Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
He looked up from his creme brulee like he was reading a weather report, eyes blank, mouth casual, spoon clinking gently against porcelain like he hadn't just burned 15 years of marriage down with one flat sentence. I cheated. I felt nothing. He said it like it was nothing more than a detail, like the brand of wine we'd just finished or the name of the waiter we never caught. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp or throw my glass. I didn't even blink. I just asked, calmly, "Do you want dessert?" Because he already had his damn hands in someone else's sugar bowl, and I figured the least I could do was offer him one final taste before I took the plate and smashed it over his delusional little world. I watched him closely while he took another bite, eyes steady, face still pretending to be a man who felt entitled to peace. He didn't expect me to stay calm. That much was obvious. He leaned back like he thought I'd throw a fit right there in the middle of the white tablecloth bistro, like I was some reality show character who'd append the centerpiece and scream about betrayal. But I wasn't that woman. Never was. I don't give people the gift of seeing me break. That's not love, that's power. And Jake didn't get to keep any more of that. We'd come here every year on our anniversary since our second. This overhyped downtown restaurant with ambient jazz and overpriced scallops. The kind of place where the staff remembered your name, but not your face. It had become routine, more ritual than romance. The last few years, the dinners had grown quieter, the compliments less genuine, the jokes more forced. But I played along because I believed in the foundation, or at least I wanted to. I think, maybe, I was pretending a little harder than I should have. The signs were there, of course. They always are. I saw the text messages that didn't light up his screen anymore, the new cologne he claimed came from a sales meeting gift bag, the sudden interest in going to the gym at 6 in the morning when he hadn't touched a treadmill since Obama's first term. I'm not a fool. But here's the thing about women like me: we wait. We don't jump at shadows. We gather, we observe, and when we move, it's deliberate and permanent. The waitress came back to ask about dessert, and I smiled at her like I hadn't just been gut-punched by the man I shared a mortgage with. "We'll have the apple tart with bourbon caramel," I said. Jake blinked like he couldn't believe I was still playing along. But I wasn't. Not really. I was already building something in my head, something silent, sharp, and heavy. Something that was going to land hard. While he scrolled his phone, probably texting her some smug little update, I told her. Finally, I watched him and thought about how strange it is, the way people can look the same and feel completely different. This man in front of me wasn't my husband anymore. He was just a guy who'd made a decision and assumed I'd be too weak or too nice to make one of my own. The dessert came, warm and sweet, and I handed him a fork. He took it like nothing had happened, like we were still Claire and Jake from the neighborhood, with the matching holiday sweaters and the dog that sheds too much. I let him enjoy it. Let him chew. I even offered him a bite of mine. Because he didn't know this was his last supper. Not the literal kind, but the last moment where he'd feel safe, secure, in control. He had no idea what was coming next. You want to know the real kicker? He didn't even apologize. Not once. Not a single goddamn, "I'm sorry." Just, "I cheated." I felt nothing. Like it was math. Like 2 + 2 = no remorse. I wonder if he practiced it in the mirror. Maybe said it to her first. Maybe she coached him through it. The nerve of some people, thinking you can drop a bomb like that and walk away clean. Jake always underestimated me. That was his first mistake. His last would come soon enough. "We paid the bill," I insisted. Told him it was my treat and smiled when he looked confused. "You've paid enough," I said. He thought I meant emotionally, spiritually, maybe for the wine. But I had something else in mind entirely. We walked out into the night, the cold air kissing my bare arms, and he asked if I wanted to share an Uber. I declined. I needed the walk. Needed to feel the ground under my feet, steady and solid and mine again. As I turned the corner, heels clicking down the pavement like gunshots, I pulled out my phone and opened the locked folder I'd started 3 months ago. Screenshots, emails, bank statements, names, dates. It was all there. I'd been building a case before he even knew there was a trial. And now he'd handed me the verdict himself, wrapped in his arrogance. I walked past a flower shop, still open late. The air smelled like lilies and rain. Funny, I thought. 15 years, and the man never once brought me flowers unless someone had died. I almost turned back. Almost handed him a bouquet with a note that said, "You just buried your own life." But I didn't. I just kept walking. "I'll take the check," I had said. But I wasn't talking about dinner. Not anymore. The day after the dinner, I ironed his shirts, made his damn coffee just the way he liked it, with oat milk and 2 sugars. Like he was some delicate little barista princess instead of a full-grown man who had just confessed to wrecking our marriage with all the emotional depth of a used napkin. I smiled at him over the mug like nothing had changed, because he still thought I was that kind of woman, the type who'd ignore, forgive, smooth things over for the sake of stability. And that's exactly what I needed him to keep thinking. Stability. Predictability. Safety. Jake had no idea that the moment he said those 6 words, I cheated. I felt nothing. He lit a fuse inside me that had been winding tighter and tighter for months. Or maybe years. Come to think of it, I'd been married to Jake for 16 years when I realized I hadn't loved him in at least 10. That's a long time to stay for someone who could barely be bothered to listen when I talked about anything that didn't involve his career or his golf swing. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell anyone, not at first. I needed time, space, and one very specific person, Miriam Rose Klein. She was a family lawyer with the voice of a librarian and the soul of a criminal prosecutor. I found her through my brother Matt's friend, who'd gotten cleaned out in his own divorce, but told me Miriam was the reason he only lost half. I met her in a bookstore cafe, of all places, and when I told her what happened, she just sipped her chamomile tea and said, "Good. He confessed." That's leverage. It wasn't just about divorce. That was too easy. I didn't want an exit, I wanted a blueprint. So I started making quiet moves, small things that wouldn't set off alarms. I copied tax returns and emailed them to myself under the name Lisa_Midwest_Flowers so Jake wouldn't find them. I went to the bank and opened a separate checking account under my maiden name just to keep track of freelance income. I told the teller, who smiled like she knew exactly what I was doing. I even called up Sheila Adams, a real estate friend I hadn't spoken to in a year, and asked for a private estimate of the house value. When she asked why, I said I was just curious, which is what women say when they're about to burn something to the ground but don't want to spook the match. Jake, meanwhile, was still playing his role, still going to work, still sleeping in my bed like everything was status quo. He probably thought the hard part was over, that once he said it out loud, we'd process it together and move on, like we were in a marriage counseling commercial instead of real life. He didn't realize I'd stopped processing with him a long time ago. I was processing through him now. My brother Matt noticed first. He came by one weekend to help install new shelves in the garage. Jake, conveniently, had a golf thing, and Matt leaned close and said, "You're different." Did he screw up? I looked at him and said nothing, but I think that was all he needed. Matt's a bulldog when it comes to family. He never liked Jake, said he smiled too hard when he was lying and talked too loud when he was nervous. And apparently Jake had been both smiling and talking quite a bit these days. I told Matt just enough to get his support, but not enough to make him confront Jake. That wasn't the plan. Confrontations for people who want justice. I didn't want justice. I wanted control. I found Jake's passwords. Not through hacking or spying, please. This isn't a spy movie. I just watched. He was careless and, more importantly, arrogant. Arrogance makes people stupid. He used the same 2 passwords for everything, recycled from college football years and our wedding date. You know what's fun? Discovering your husband has been emailing a woman named Heather from his work account like corporate IT doesn't exist. She sent him pictures. Nothing graphic, but enough to make me raise an eyebrow and wonder why men always think women named Heather will save them from themselves. I printed the emails, every single one. And I put them in a folder I labeled tax receipts and tucked it beneath the old Christmas decorations in the attic. Safe, quiet, untouched. Just like me. For now. I also began recording things. Conversations. Phone calls. I used one of those tiny voice recorders that fit in a pocket because let me tell you something, I had no interest in going into court without backup. Miriam told me what to gather. Bank accounts, investment accounts, insurance policies, retirement funds. Did you know that if you can prove a spouse was hiding income or spending marital funds on an affair, you can request reimbursement through asset division? Neither did I. But Miriam knew. And now, so did I. Jake thought I was redecorating the guest room. He commented on the new paint swatches and said he liked the deep green. Soothing, he called it. I said, that's what I was going for. But it wasn't soothing. It was strategic. That room wasn't going to hold a guest. It was going to hold every single piece of evidence I'd been collecting for 2 straight months. I even bought a new filing cabinet. He never asked what it was for. And I didn't tell him, because I wasn't redecorating the guest room. I was preparing for war. There's a very specific kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a liar walk confidently into his own trap, completely unaware that the ground beneath him has already been sawed loose and hollowed out, just waiting for the fall. Jake always assumed I wasn't paying attention, that I was too soft-hearted or too loyal to ever pull the trigger, but what he never understood is that women like me don't pull triggers, we build them, polish them, and hand them to our enemies with a smile. It started on a Tuesday, one of those gray, unremarkable afternoons where the world looks like it's holding its breath and no one's really paying attention. Jake was home early from work, mumbling something about a Zoom training that got canceled. I took it as an opportunity. I made him a sandwich, poured him a glass of that cheap Cabernet he liked to pretend was bold, and said, in my sweetest voice, we should talk about refinancing the house. There's this tax incentive coming up, and Miriam said now's the time. He blinked like a man who'd just heard half the sentence and agreed to the rest out of habit. I knew exactly how he operated. He never asked questions about anything boring unless it involved interest rates or his car insurance premium. I had already met with Miriam twice that week. We'd gone over the strategy line by line, making sure the documents were legally airtight but dressed in everyday language. The forms looked like regular tax and mortgage paperwork, dense, dull, and coded in enough government speak to make Jake's eyes glaze over halfway through. He didn't read them. Of course he didn't. He just signed. 5 pages, initialed at the corners, scribbled signatures at the bottom. It took him less than 10 minutes to sign away the house to me exclusively. I tucked the pages into a bright blue folder and placed it gently into my purse, thanking him with a kiss on the cheek. You're such a good partner, I told him. He smiled and went back to his phone, probably texting Heather some nonsense about how he was managing things at home. That night, I made him steak and mashed potatoes, the exact meal I cooked the night he proposed. He didn't remember, of course. He said it tasted familiar, like a meal from some past life. I nodded, pretending not to notice the irony. It was indeed from a past life, the one where I was the fool who thought forever meant something. We watched a movie on the couch, something dumb and loud, and I let him fall asleep with his head resting on my thigh. My fingers ran through his hair while my mind ran through legal clauses and contingency plans. For the next several weeks, I kept everything exactly the same. I still folded his laundry, still laughed at his recycled jokes, still answered questions about our joint calendar as if we were planning for a future. But behind the curtains, things were moving fast. I filed for divorce in a different county, the one where we owned a rental property, using a legal loophole Miriam spotted in the residency requirements. I asked the court for expedited processing, citing financial discrepancies, remember those affair expenses? Yeah, those weren't just emotional grievances anymore. Those were itemized and documented and leveraged like a crowbar against a locked door. While Jake was out at a conference in Atlanta, spoiler alert, he wasn't conferencing. I had the locks changed on the rental, froze one of our joint accounts, and met with a property evaluator who confirmed the house had nearly doubled in value since we bought it 12 years ago. That part was key. Because when the dust settled and the asset division came up in mediation, I wasn't just going to ask for the house. I was going to own it outright. And I already did. On paper. Signed. Sealed. Delivered. To me. The only thing left was to wait for him to feel brave. And right on cue, 2 months later, Jake walked through the front door with that puffed-up chest and fake solemnity that he always put on when he wanted to look like the good guy in a bad story. He was holding a manila envelope, looking proud and stupid, like a high school kid who just found the courage to break up with his prom date. He even cleared his throat before he said it. "I think it's time we made this official," he said, placing the envelope on the kitchen counter like it contained a treasure map instead of paperwork for the divorce he thought he was initiating. I looked at the envelope, then back at him, my expression neutral, maybe even a little amused. "Oh," I said, like he'd just handed me a grocery list. "That's sweet." He blinked. Confused. Like he expected tears or screaming or at least some reaction that proved I still cared. He didn't get it. He hadn't gotten it for a long time. I walked to the drawer beside the fridge, the one where we used to keep coupons and broken pens, and slid it open. Inside was another envelope, a different shade of beige, fatter and much older than his. I pulled it out and handed it to him like a hostess returning a forgotten umbrella. "You're a little late," I said, watching the color drain from his face. "Mine were finalized last week." He stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Opened it. Read the words. Saw my signature, the court seal, the date. His voice cracked before his pride did. "You, already, signed." "Filed." "Closed," I said, pouring myself a glass of water with one hand, as if I hadn't just detonated the rest of his delusions with the other. He stood there, speechless for the first time in a long time, holding his useless little envelope like it meant something. But it didn't. Not anymore. Because I already had the house, the papers, and the final word. There's a kind of silence that follows a man who's finally realized he isn't in control anymore, the heavy, echoing silence of someone whose empire was made of sand and whose queen left the castle weeks ago with the deed in one hand and a half smile in the other. Jake didn't even try to call for 3 days after I handed him that envelope, probably too stunned to understand how completely I'd played him. Too bruised in the ego to believe that I'd not only seen his betrayal coming, but had sprinted miles ahead of it with legal signatures and airtight timing. But I knew, even then, that his silence wasn't peace, it was panic with a decent poker face. When he finally showed up again, it wasn't at the house he used to share with me. No, by then, the locks were changed, the garage code reset, and his name scrubbed off the utilities like he'd never lived there at all. He tried calling first, then texting, and when I didn't respond, he sent an email. Not a real one, some half-hearted plea cloaked in fake professionalism, full of phrases like mutual understanding and respect for the process, like I was just a colleague he needed to schedule a performance review with. I didn't reply. Why would I? He'd already failed the evaluation. I heard from Matt before I heard from Jake again. My brother called me one morning, chewing on something loud and crunchy while reading some finance blog out loud, and said, "You hear about Jake's new palace?" I didn't even pretend to play dumb. "The condo?" I asked. "Yeah. I heard it has all the charm of a dentist's waiting room." Matt laughed so hard he nearly choked on whatever discount cereal he was inhaling. "I saw the listing," he said between bites. "Downtown, 3rd floor, view of a dumpster and a washer that leaks unless you slam it like it owes you money." It wasn't that I wanted Jake to suffer, okay, maybe a little, but mostly I just wanted him to feel small. Not ruined, not destroyed, just diminished. That's the real pain, isn't it? When the world doesn't end with fire and screaming, but with indifference. When the people you thought would orbit you forever simply disappear without asking permission. And Heather, let's not forget Heather, she found out too. It took less than a week for her to realize that Jake's version of events didn't line up with reality. He'd promised her a clean break, a fresh start, some shiny bullshit about leaving his wife with dignity and closure. What he didn't tell her was that I had filed first, walked away first, and taken everything with me, leaving him scrambling like a man who lost his wallet and realized his pants were missing, too. From what I gathered, thanks to a mutual friend who worked in the same building, Heather didn't take it well. There was a scene. Voices were raised. Doors slammed. Someone saw Jake walking out of the building with a cardboard box full of personal crap the same day he was supposed to lead a regional meeting. I imagined her tossing his stupid golf mug across the room, maybe screaming something like, "You said she didn't care." Oh, but I did. I just cared better than she ever would. Then he asked if we could talk. Just once. No lawyers. No paperwork. Just a conversation. I almost said no. Almost deleted the message without reading it twice. But something in me, curiosity maybe, or cruelty, said yes. We met at a coffee shop far enough from our old neighborhood that no one would recognize us. He looked tired. Older. Smaller. Like someone had turned down the saturation on his whole life. He sat down across from me, fumbling with the lid on his cup like a nervous teenager, trying to hide his shaking hands. He asked how I'd been. I said I'd been busy. He tried to make a joke, something flat and awkward about the weather, and I didn't laugh. The pause stretched long enough to make him squirm. Finally, he looked up and said, "I thought I'd feel something." I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. Something? I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. He swallowed, his voice soft. Something when it ended. Regret. Relief. Anger. I thought I'd feel something. I smiled, slow and tired, like a woman watching a movie she's already seen too many times. I thought I'd cry, I said. I thought there'd be a hole in my chest. But I'm just bored. And the truth is, I was. Not sad, not triumphant. Just bored. Because the drama was over, the storm had passed, and all that was left was the man across from me, a man who had once promised to love me forever, and ended up not even being worth my anger. He didn't respond. Just looked at me like maybe, just maybe, he finally understood what it meant to lose something you thought you could take for granted. But it was too late. And I didn't need to say it out loud. The first morning after Jake was gone, the house sounded strange, not in the way you'd expect after a man packs up his final box and slinks out with his tail between his legs, but in the deeper, weirder way where space rearranges itself, reshapes around the absence, like the air itself has been holding its breath for too long and finally exhales. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no shattered picture frames lying face down on the floor, just the echo of nothing. The quiet wasn't peaceful, not exactly, but it was wide and clean and mine. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the place where I'd once cooked for him like it was a language only we spoke, and now I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of the wind outside the window. And it struck me how many noises I'd been too distracted to notice. Or maybe too tired. The coffee maker dripped slowly, as if unsure it still had a job to do, and I poured myself a cup with a hand that didn't shake at all, which felt almost disrespectful, considering the decade and a half I'd just burned to the ground. Matt showed up that night with a bottle of wine under one arm and a frozen pizza under the other, both presented like peace offerings, even though there was no war left to fight. He made some crack about the condo again, said Jake's new address sounded like the name of a chain restaurant, and I laughed louder than I meant to. It felt foreign, that kind of laugh, like borrowing someone else's lungs. We ate on the couch, our plates balanced on our knees, and he told me I looked lighter, like I'd dropped something heavy I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I said I dropped someone heavy, and Matt raised his glass to that. The papers came 2 days later, Final and official, the kind of government beige envelope that normally carries bad news about jury duty or missed taxes, but this one was a small relief wrapped in bureaucracy. Miriam had slipped a sticky note onto the first page, all done. Enjoy your silence. I liked that. Enjoy your silence. Not your freedom, not your power, but your silence. Because that's what victory looks like sometimes, not fire and applause, but the soft closing of a door that no longer needs to be locked. I threw a party that weekend, but not the kind you're thinking of. There were no guests, no streamers, no loud music or themed cocktails with punny names. I baked a cake, chocolate with raspberry filling because Jake hated raspberries, and opened a bottle of sparkling wine I'd been saving for nothing in particular. I played the records he never liked, danced barefoot in the living room in an old t-shirt, and sang every single note off-key just because I could. The whole house felt drunk on itself, on the absence of expectation, on the fact that I no longer had to shrink myself to fit inside his shrinking attention span. I didn't cry. Not once. I kept waiting for it, thinking maybe I'd crack while brushing my teeth or folding laundry or seeing some stupid couple in the frozen food aisle looking too happy. But the tears never came, because this wasn't grief, it was subtraction. The removal of something that never added up right in the first place. He wasn't a husband anymore. He was just a lesson I'd learned the long, expensive, and brilliantly calculated way. And here's the part no one knows, the thing I never told even Matt or Miriam, or the one friend who keeps asking if I'm really okay. I knew. Not just for a few weeks, not even a few months. I knew about the affair for over a year. Not just a hunch or a bad feeling, I knew. I saw the messages, the photos, the receipts tucked into his jacket pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. I heard the fake smiles in his voice, the way he said my name like it had dust on it. I knew. But I didn't say a word. Not then. Because I needed time. Not to forgive. Not to heal. But to win. And winning doesn't look like screaming at someone across a table or throwing their clothes into the yard at midnight. It looks like walking past them every single day, pretending not to see the fire in the corner of the room while you quietly move the valuables out the back door and prepare the insurance claim. It looks like patience. It looks like silence. It looks like me. Now the house is mine. The bed is mine. The calendar is mine. And every breath I take feels like it belongs to someone I hadn't met before, myself, maybe, or whoever I had to become to make it this far. Sometimes I stand in the hallway, where the light from the window hits just right in the late afternoon, and I wonder if I'd never found out, if I'd never caught him with his mask slipping, would I have left? Would I still be cooking dinner for someone who never tasted it, still sleeping beside someone who thought my body was a placeholder for something younger, thinner, newer? Or did I need him to say it out loud, just once, so I could finally give myself permission to destroy him?